Now, St. Thomas I mentioned before, and this is why St. Thomas's Hospital is called St. Thomas. The reason I'm going to briefly divert here is this is the first documented cure of blindness that we have in the record, apart from Jesus' miracles. The story concerns Eilward of Westinglong and his neighbour Fulk, who were working in the field, and they had an argument because Fulk owed Eilward some money for some land he had lent. Fulk decides that this wasn't the case, and the records say that they go off to the local pub to discuss it, as is the English fashion. Whilst they're in the pub, they say, look, I'll let you off half the bill if you pay for the beer. They get rolling drunk. He decides he's not going to pay Eilward the money, so Eilward in a temper runs off, goes round to his house, steals a pair of ditching gloves, and then goes back to his house. Unfortunately for him, Fulk's children are in the garden and see it, and run to the pub and say, Dad, 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 you know your mate? Well, he's just nicked the ditching gloves. Let's go and get him. So they go round, and they beat him up, and they take him round, and they call in the magistrate, who says, well, it's a pair of ditching gloves. Now, come on, you're both a bit drunk, calm down. But the kids then run round and put some other things round, like a whetstone and some knives. Say, oh, it's not just the ditching gloves, Your Honour. Look at that. He's got the knives, he's got the whetstone, he's a real guilty one, this one. So, right, so then he has to be arraigned. So now there is enough to arrest him, and he's arrested and put in jail. Now, very unfortunate for him, there'd been law reform. And the law reform was the Assizes of Clarendon, when Henry II had decided to bring in the newfangled European Directive of Human Rights, which in those days was trial by ordeal. So sacrificing the age-old English traditions of decency, honesty and good law, we have this European system. So he's then tried by this. He has to put his hand into the water to seize the red-hot metal. He's burned and scalded. It's bound in the church in the natural way, and 3 days later it is unbound. It's found to have festered. He's therefore guilty and suffers the punishment. The punishment is depicted in the Trinity window here. I've enlarged it for you, and it shows him having his eyes being gouged out and his testicles and member being cut off in front of his eyes before his eyes are gouged out. And here's the magistrate with his white cap overlooking this to make sure it's done properly. He staggers off. He now realises his life is over, and he prays. And he prays at the altar of the Virgin Mary, who comes to him and says, if you pray to St. Thomas, he will come to you and he will help you. So he prays. And interestingly, and this is the only one of St. Thomas's miracles where St. Thomas actually appears, because St. Thomas actually was a blood cult. And what that was, if you wanted to be cured by St. Thomas, and many people were, after he was killed, he had the back of his head cut off, his brains and blood were all, it was a mess. It really was like a Inspector Morse mystery. And they cleaned it all up and they put it into pots and stored it for some years. And if you came to the shrine, you were given some of this blood on your tongue or as a topical treatment for your sores. Now, there are several problems with that. One is it's disgusting. Secondly, it's vaguely heretical because Jesus, of course, had blood. And then thirdly, there's a problem with raw supplies. And they're going to run out because there is only one brain and 8 pints of blood at most, and you can probably scrape up 2. So what they did, they hit on the happy solution of dilution. So they diluted this in wine, and this lasted until Henry VIII destroyed the last remaining stocks. So if you do want a cure for anything and you want St. Thomas's blood, you have to now go abroad and have other saints where their bloods are used in a similar fashion. Back to this guy. So he appears in life. And St. Thomas comes to him with his crozier and touches him on his eyes and on his members. And here we see him running down the street, pointing to his eyes. He can now see he's giving money to the poor, and he has this enormous erection, which is this tree that's discreetly shown growing out from between his legs as this palm tree. So St. Thomas was a very, very powerful person, and that's why the hospital was named after him. And that, as by the way, is the first cure of blindness that we have documented.